Okay, hello to everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. If there's something wrong with either the video or the sound, please let me know as soon as possible. Let me just try sharing the screen right now. Okay. Okay, I think we should be fine. Yeah, so in today's, my name is Matic. I'm from Dewesoft, Slovenia. I work at the headquarters, and today this webinar is going to be about the new and exciting features of X3 SP5. So to start off, just a few quick words about myself. Yeah, as I already said, I work for Dewesoft's headquarters, and my current role with the company is as a project manager, which basically keeps me involved with all new software and hardware feature developments. So that's why I'm the one presenting the new features today. Also, before that, I spent about 2 years at Dewesoft's customer support division. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of the customer base, of the software as a whole. I think I have a good idea of what users like about the software, where things could be improved. So I think I'm going to be able to explain all of the features in an easy to understand way. Okay. To just quickly go over the structure of today's webinar. So we've got about 40 minutes and I've got quite a lot of material to cover. So I would appreciate if you could hold all of your questions until the end, just so we don't stop the flow of the presentation. If you get a question during the session, please just write it down in the chat box and I'll make sure to address it at the end. Okay, so right now I'm gonna switch to my screen feed. I hope you can see the slides fine. So to start off, I've got 1 or 2 slides, but then pretty much everything will be done through Dewesoft, through demonstration. So you'll be able to get a better idea of some of the new features. Okay, so a quick overview. Basically, this stems from the Spotlight article that I wrote. So if you haven't checked that out, then I'd strongly recommend for you to read it. It basically lists and goes into some detail about all of the main points of X3 SP5. So yeah, the biggest feature, the biggest improvement is of course the sound intensity module. So this is a brand new application field for Dewesoft. So that's why we're not going to talk about it today, because the topic is just too huge. And we've also already had a dedicated webinar for this. So if you missed that webinar, then it will be available soon online on YouTube. And you can check it out a bit later if you're interested in the topic. The main topic of today's webinar will actually be the 2D map, which is a brand new visual control. It's basically meant to replace the old GPS control. It has a ton of new features, and I'm gonna demonstrate everything live. The next important point are the model test improvements. So model testing is a module that was already part of Dewesoft, but with X3 SP5, we've improved it greatly. And that's why we also had a dedicated webinar for this. So same as with sound intensity, if you have not seen it yet and would be interested, then you'll be able to do that online soon. We've also added support for CanFD. At the moment, this is software only. What I mean by that is that we don't have any hardware devices that could read CanFD at the moment. This is planned for Q2 or maybe Q3 of this year. What we can do, however, is use some devices from Vector, connect them to your PC, use Dewesoft, and read CanFD data from there. So basically up to 64 bytes. The second point, or I should say the second key part of today's session will be a demonstration of the cursor module. So this is also a brand new module available to all professional users for free. So basically, if you have a Dewesoft instrument, you'll be able to use this module from now on from X3 SP5. And I'm going to explain what the module is all about, do some live demonstrations. So yeah, at the end, you'll be able to incorporate it in your daily applications. We also added a new export file type, which is called ASM-MDF. So if you're in the automotive sector, you're probably familiar with this. So for example, if you're using a third-party analysis tool that supports the MDF import, then you could basically just use your Dewesoft data, export it to MDF, and then import it into your software. So there's not much to demonstrate in this case. It's basically just another option in the export menu. And the end of today's presentation will be concluded with some minor but useful improvements, which you may or may not have missed, and that I think are worth mentioning. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got quite a bit of material to go through, so let me just go ahead and start with Dewesoft. So what I've prepared here is basically a project template and a setup template. So this is just to speed things up so that I don't have to set up everything from scratch. But before I can show you the 2D map, I would first like to introduce you to the navigation module, which can be added via the main toolbar over here. And this is basically, it's also a new module, oh, sorry. I received some messages from the screen sharing platform. Never mind. The navigation module is basically used to group your GPS data. It provides kind of a clean user interface so you can organize everything, define it, and then use that on the map. So basically it's not a standalone application, it's just kind of a user interface tool for managing your data. So if your GPS signals are coming straight from the GPS module, like we would have a GPS icon over here, then the navigation module is not needed because the GPS module already takes care of everything. But in a different scenario, if your GPS data is originating, for example, from the CAN bus or from a custom plugin or whatever, then the navigation module is needed to group and define those channels. So for my example, I've got data streaming over CAN. If I just show the use channels, you can see that I've got data coming in with about 100 Hertz. And what you had to do in the past, you basically had to configure channels manually. You had to go to measure mode, find the setup of each channel, and then kind of change its type to the GPS coordinate, which was very obscure, not easy to find. So now this is replaced with the navigation module. So basically, you just find the correct channel and assign it here in the interface. Yeah, so basically I'm selecting my CAN longitude and CAN latitude, and right away you can see the output on the bottom. It's basically a navigation channel, which is a matrix channel, and for each of the inputs that I've selected, I get a column. Also, another new option is to define the time base. So this is here because in the past, the old visual control kind of had an issue if your data wasn't coming in at exactly the same time. So for example, with CAN, which is an asynchronous source, one, let's say, longitude could be slightly ahead of latitude, and in some rare scenarios, that would cause display issues. So by just defining the time base, we make sure that the data is coming in at the same time, so the map can properly display it. And there's also a technical reason behind the distinction. So we want to keep each component separate. So basically we want to have the navigation module take care of the channel grouping, of the time base, of all the mathematics, and we want to let the 2D map just focus on displaying the data, which is also correct from a development standpoint. And it's easier to avoid bugs and find bugs if they manage to take place. Okay, switching to the measure mode. If I go to the design tab, you can see that there's a new icon over here, which is the map visual control. If I place it on my predefined screen, you can straight away see that I've got the navigation channel over here, and right away I've got a template of the world. And as I zoom in further, I get closer to the X, which you can see that is in Slovenia. As I move even further, you can see that we're located somewhere in Trbovlje, and the X the trace rather, is being drawn on the road, and the X is moving along the road. So basically X marks the current position of the latest coordinate. So this is a straight out of the box solution which everyone can have. You can see that there's no difficulties in the setup. I just assign the channels, I get the map overlay by default, and it's very simple to use. If you're wondering why we're showing an X, well, that's basically because I did not define any orientation. So if I find my heading channel, assign it to the navigation module, you can see that now I have 3 columns. So when I switch back to measure mode, straight away you will see that now instead of an X, I actually have an arrow, which is pointing in the direction that the car is orientated. Basically, this file was recorded by one of my colleagues who took a drive basically behind the company. So what he will do is he'll continue along this road for about 10 to 15 minutes. So yeah, this was the basic and most out-of-the-box usage of the map. But since we have some time, what I want to do is basically go through all of the settings and really show you what the visual control is capable of, and explain how it's doing it and basically what's happening under the hood. So first, if I click the Manage Layers tab, this introduces us to layers. So basically, layers are what you see on the screen. In this case, what Dewesoft is using, we've got an OpenStreetMap layer, and OpenStreetMap is a open source, as the name suggests, tile technology, or tile, let's say, software tool. Basically, they provide images, and the only requirement to use those images in commercial purposes like Dewesoft is to run those images off your own server. So what Dewesoft has done, we've taken those images, we've set up our own server, and we offer that server to all of our professional users. And by default, when you add the map, you're automatically connected to the server. And basically, this is an online usage of the map. So when we assign any GPS channels to this, basically Dewesoft is sending requests over the internet to download the images based on those coordinates. When we receive those images, we save them to the hard drive. We're basically caching them so that the next time that the coordinates are the same, we no longer have to download them from the web. We can just take them from the hard drive, so to speed up the process and use less bandwidth. As I mentioned, the image that you're seeing right now is basically a tile layer. So in the industry of, let's say, map imaging, we've got 2 most standard options. One is tile layers and the other one is WMS layers. So at the moment, Dewesoft provides you with a tile layer. We at the moment don't offer a WMS layer, but if you, for example, or your customer has access to a WMS layer or a WMS server, then you can add it through this interface right here. It will work basically in the same way. Of course, we realize that most often users won't have access to the internet, whether that be in the field or even maybe in the laboratory because of IT restrictions. So for that case, we've added an offline usage for the map, which is basically what we call a local layer. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to first use the jump to coordinates feature. So if I use it right here, I can basically enter in the longitude and the latitude, but what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to use the address search feature. So if I search for Palm Springs, select the jump and close button, now I'm able to see that I'm located somewhere in California, more precisely in Palm Springs. And currently the images that we see are again pulled from the web. But if I want to use them in the offline mode, basically what I have to do is go back to Manage Layers, find the layer that I'm interested in, which in this case is the online layer, and download it. Okay. The coordinates are automatically taken from the screen. All I need to do now is define the level of detail, or the level of levels in this case, which I'll explain in a second. and then save them to a local folder. So I'll create a new folder on the desktop called Palm Springs and select that folder and start the download. So yeah, basically now Dewesoft is pulling the images and saving them to the folder. And what the levels are, they basically define the level of detail. So the 0 at level is the first level, and it shows you just an overview of the world. And then with each level, you move deeper and deeper. So basically, you get more images, you get a higher level of detail, and yeah, the images increase basically exponentially. So if I set this now to invisible and try to add a local layer, you can see right away I'm directed to the Palm Springs folder. And if I open this in the Explorer, just to give you a sense of what's inside the folders over here. So we've got the 16 layers that I've defined. And as I move deeper and deeper, you can see that there are more and more images. If I finally go to the, let's say, 14th layer, you can see that there are quite a lot of images because we're already so far zoomed in. And I think at the moment you can go to the 20th layer, which is the most detailed. So if I select the Palm Springs folder, yeah, now basically I'm displaying a local layer which is offline. So everything that you see right here has been pre-downloaded. And if I wanted, I could plug out the Ethernet cable, plug out my internet connection, I would still see this same image. So yeah, if I zoom in, you can see that there's some detail, but as I zoom in further, the text becomes kind of foggy. That's because we can only go to the 15th layer, which is what I have downloaded previously. And as I zoom out, you'll see that I start to get missing data. And that's, of course, as a result, because I did not download such a wide area. What I can do, however, just to show you the multi-layer feature, I can basically turn on multiple layers. So now if I also turn on the online layer, the whole map fills out, but then I can use the opacity feature to sort of make it a bit darker. And this gives me a better understanding of which areas are currently online and which areas are downloaded and on my hard drive. Okay, so I'll just set everything back to default. Here is another option, which we'll talk about in a second. So moving on down the menu, another very, very cool feature is the coloring, which was not present previously. So basically, what you often want to do is rather than just have a solid trace color for your object, you want to color it based on data from other channels. So in practical use cases, this could be, let's say, velocity, acceleration, maybe even voltage in electric vehicles or whatever. So for my case, I've got some CAN velocity data. And if I use this, basically I get a scale from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. And the trace of the car gets colored based on the velocity. So whenever the car went 100 kilometers an hour, the trace will be red, and when it stood still, it will be dark blue. We've also got different color map options, so if you don't like the default ones, we've got several to choose from. I think the jet color scheme is one of the most useful and tells you a lot about the data. Then we've got the attach camera feature, which I already used. So basically, if you've got a vehicle that's moving along a long road like we have here, it makes sense to always keep the vehicle in the center. And this is exactly what the attach camera feature does. So as you can see, the arrow is always in the center, no matter how it moves. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, but I cannot move the screen. To move the position, I can disable this feature, and then I can freely move the map around. So this would make more sense in a, let's say, proving ground or a track environment where you constantly want to have the whole track in view. And the final parameter of the map is the show points feature. So basically, if you had GPS data that had a low resolution, lower frequency, at the moment I've got 100 Hertz, you could maybe more easily distinguish between points At the moment, this is not really apparent, but if your GPS data is not that fast, you could see individual points rather than just lines. Okay. For the next example of the map, I'm basically going to create a new setup. Here I won't really have any GPS data, but I just want to show you a quick example of using geo-referenced images. So as I mentioned before, we've got an additional option right here, which is built from TIFE, and TIFE is a standard file extension or standard file type for geo-referenced images. So what are geo-referenced images? I've got an example of one right here. If I edit it, it will open up with Microsoft Paint, and you can see that this is a high-resolution satellite image of a part of a city. So this is an image of Maribor, which is one of Slovenia's cities, and it's quite detailed. You can see, for example, cars, swimming pools, houses quite clearly. This image, you can see it's 62 megabytes in size, and it's not your regular image. It also includes coordinate data. So not only is it an image, it also holds GPS data. And what I can do with this image is basically, I can again create layers from it. So first I need to find my image. If I just copy the path over here and find the image that we just opened, then again, I need to create an export directory. So in this case, I'll just say Maribor, since this is the name of the city, and start the build. So basically this will cut down the image into smaller chunks and smaller levels so that it can be again used with the map. This is, for example, very useful if you're repeating your tests over and over again on the same area, such as a proving ground. It makes sense to get yourself a very high resolution image, use it in this way, and then you're basically set for all your tests. You can just keep reusing the high resolution image. Okay, so now that we've created this, I can just again add a local layer. I'll just hide this one for now, add a local layer. It automatically opens up to Maribor. And as you can see, now we've got different levels. We basically go from 13 to 18, and that's because the zoom was different than before. So before we went from 0 to 15, and now we only have a highly detailed view. If I select this folder, now it's automatically displayed, but the reason that we're not seeing anything on the screen is because we're not in the correct location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again use the jump to coordinates feature, and I've got some coordinates prepared over here. So if I just enter these in real quick. Jump and close. Yeah, you can straight away see that we are now able to see on the map the same image that I previously opened in Microsoft Paint. And as I zoom in further, you can see that there's still a big level of detail. So I can see cars, I can see road signs, I can see houses, swimming pools quite clearly. So yeah, again, this is very useful for environments that are constantly tested. And if I want to, I can also, again, use the multiple layers feature. So if I enable my OpenStreetMap source, now basically the map fills out. So whenever I'm missing the satellite image, the OpenStreetMap layer will take over and just continue so that we don't see empty spaces. Okay, and there's one final example with the map. Just to show you that you can also use the same visual control also on old files. So in this case, I've got a very special file, which is the Nürburgring race. And what I've done here, initially we only had the GPS data from one car, but I used a little trick. Basically what I did was I used the delay mathematics to delay my GPS data, in essence simulating another car. Then I used both GPS data in the navigation module, basically creating two navigation objects, and then using both objects on the same map. And what this allows us to do is basically plot two GPS objects on the same screen. So right now, as you can see, we basically have two cars and they're both moving along the track. So this just goes to show you that the map is not limited to only one source of GPS data. You can have multiple and display them on the same screen, which is a very, very cool and useful feature. Also, at the moment, I'm using kind of a special development version of the map. So what this allows me to do is to test some of our internal servers for really, really advanced imaging. So in this case, I'm using 3 layers. I'm using a highly detailed satellite layer. Then I also have the names of the cities and streets. And also I've got some hill shading to make the appearance of the image kind of 3D. So this is not available for our users, but it just goes to show you that really, really sophisticated results can be achieved with the map if you have access to the right environments. And if you may or may not have noticed, through the session, I've tried to refer to the visual control as the 2D map. And the reason for that is that basically we're also going to come out with a 3D version of the map. So that one will be used for displaying airborne objects such as rockets, helicopters, planes, whatever. It will give you a 3D view of the Earth, and it will be able to project data on top of it. So I can't speak at the moment when that will come out, but it's just something to keep in mind to know what's being worked on. So this basically concludes the presentation and tutorial for the map. And now we're going to move on to the second part of today's session, which is going to be about the cursor module. So for this, I've also prepared a data file. And to start off, basically what the cursor module is, it's basically kind of an extension of the latch value mat. So if you've perhaps used that in the past, it's basically used for identifying events within a data file, latching data, and it will also give you a nice representation on the recorder visual control. So to start off, I've chosen a data file which has several, which I could call events. What I mean by that is we've got a model testing file. So we've got a hammer that hits the surface, and a direct correlation of that hit is the acceleration data. So if I move to the setup tab and add the cursor module over here, you can see right away that I get an error saying that the reference channel is not defined. So what is a reference channel? The reference channel is basically the channel on which we're searching. So in my case, I'm interested in what the force looks like. And then we define the search mode, and we'll start by looking at the maximum of the force. I will also rename the cursor, and I'll say this is the max force cursor. Okay. As I switch to review, I can recalculate the data, and right after recalculating it, you can see that a new cursor has appeared. And this basically tells me where the max level of the force is located. If I zoom in, you can see that the cursor disappears. That's because it needs to be recalculated. So if I turn on the auto recalculate feature, I can zoom in even further. And finally, I discovered that the cursor is placed exactly on the highest point. So if I move this down a bit, I can also add some digital meters. So the only useful data that we get from the cursor module at the moment is the time channel. So this basically tells me at what point in time my max force is located. So we've got 15 seconds, which matches with what the recorder says. If I, for example, zoom into a different part of the data file, you can see that the time is now changing. The reason for this is basically that Dewesoft only calculates the highlighted portion of the data file. So with that, it's basically able to find local extremes. So the maximum of only this section. But if I zoom fully out, then it's able to find the maximum of the whole file. Okay. You can see that we've also got some available inputs, and what these are is basically, this will be the data that gets latched at that event. So to make a bit more sense, if I select force and acceleration and give them some meaningful names, so I say max force and acceleration at max force. And I'll also change the color to red to, I think it's more appropriate for the maximum. So as I recalculate, I can see that the cursor is now a different color. And if I add 2 more digital meters, I can choose the max force and also the acceleration at max force. So if I now again zoom into this section, you can see that the maximum force is 8.86 newtons, and the acceleration value at that time is 308 meters per square second. So it basically extracted those values. Okay, this is the basic usage of the cursor module. What you can do now is use different search modes. So I just showed you the maximum. The minimum is pretty much the same, so I don't think it makes sense to show it. What I will do instead, I will add another cursor, and I'll rename this one to force crossing. So again, I'm going to be interested in how the force channel behaves, and I want to know when the force channel will cross a certain threshold. So in this case, I'm just going to use, let's say, 6 newtons. Okay, and again, I want to know what the force level will be at that time and what the acceleration level will be at that time. So I'm going to rename those acceleration at force crossing. Switch back to review, recalculate, and right away you see that we now have a second cursor, which is the crossing. I can again add the channels that I've added previously. So first we're interested at the time, then we want to know the force level and the acceleration level. Okay, if I now zoom into this area, recalculate again, and zoom in really deep enough. And to make this a bit more clear, I'm just first going to use the shortcut over here. So this is also a new feature. It basically allows you to edit your cursors, edit that interface straight from the review mode. So I just select the force crossing option, and it opens up the same setup that we had in the setup module, and I can choose a different level. So let's say I want to now look at 4.5 newtons. Okay, yeah, this I think makes it a bit clearer. Basically what I wanted to demonstrate is that the force crossing cursor is not placed directly above any sample. The reason for this is that Dewesoft is able to linearly interpolate the data. So what it did, it searched for 4.5 newtons in the file, and it found the first sample just below that and the first sample just above that. And then using the timestamps, it was able to locate where the 4.5 value would be. And with that time information, it was also able to interpolate the acceleration data. So as you can see, we have extracted 173 meters per square second. And if we look at the values below, none of them match that value, meaning that the acceleration data was also interpolated. So basically what this allows us to do is kind of go beyond just your sampling rate and achieve even, let's say, higher resolution results. You also may be wondering, there are multiple level crossings within the same data file. So for minimums and maximums, there's usually only one extreme in the data file. But for level crossings, there can be plenty. So what can we do about that? Well, basically we've added on the control channel, we've added another option, which is the next and previous button. So if we use the next and previous button in combination with the search position channel, this basically allows us to move to different events within the data file. So each time I click, Dewesoft will find the next event. So if I, for example, also add a digital meter and use the search position channel, you can see that at the moment I'm looking at the 8th event. And as I move further, now I'm at the 10th event, 11th event, and so on. Oh, sorry about that. Let me just go back to my screen. Yeah. What we can also do is add the simple input field control, and now we can move to any specific event that we're interested in. So if we want to look at the 34th event, I can just enter in that value and the cursor automatically jumps to that point. If I want to go back to the 12th event, then I can do that as well. And then I can fine tune it with my buttons too. So just a nice and easy way to move between events. And one final feature with the cursors. So basically what happens is that you are often interested in the relationship between different cursors, between different events. And basically what you're looking for are delta values. And to do that, what you normally need to do is create a separate formula for each channel, but we've made that a bit easier. And we basically allow the user to define a delta cursor channel. And what this will do, it will automatically subtract the values, so you don't have to do it manually. So if I add 3 more digital meters, you can see that now I have some more channels available. So if I plot the cursor delta, the force delta, and the acceleration delta, you can see that basically it's subtracting the crossing level from the force level. So 15 minus 3 is 11, and so on and so on. One final thing with the cursors is that we've also reworked the cursors on the XY graph. So even the yellow cursor is now different. So before it was just a solid yellow X, but now we've added 2 more lines which head to the X and Y axis to make the values more easily identifiable. And also any cursors that you've defined in your setup module are now also displayed on the XY recorder. So if I, for example, move using the buttons that I've previously demonstrated, then also the buttons on the XY recorder will move. So this concludes the cursor demonstration. We just have 2 more things to show. Basically, with the cursor module, I showed you the new shortcut. Something very similar is available for all mathematics. So basically here I'm calculating the displacement, and as I hover my mouse over the displacement, you can see that there's a setup button, and if I click it, I can access the math editing interface straight away, which makes it very, very convenient. So this was already available before, but you had to right click on the channel and then edit the formula. But now it's basically just a setup button that makes it very obvious and very convenient to edit the math. Secondly, we've also reworked the display adding interface. So before everything was present on the left column over here, now everything is merged into the section above. So if I want to edit, for example, the recorder screen, I just right click on it. I can add a sub display. I can move it left or right. I can access its properties, which hold your usual properties. So from the name, the image, and attaching the same display to a secondary monitor. But the new cool feature is display rebuilding. And what this allows you to do is basically rebuild a automatically generated display. So here we've got the couple default ones, but where this comes most in handy is with application modules. So for example, power or combustion analysis or even model test, they've got very complicated displays, and sometimes you want to change them, you mess something up and you'd like to revert back, which is very difficult to do. Or for example, you just like to generate another template. So this is all accessible now through the added display feature. So for example, if I wanted to rebuild the model test measure screen, I just click on it and it gets automatically generated. Then for example, if I start editing it, I make some mistakes, I want to revert back, I can right click it again, and then just rebuild the display, which will return it to its original state, which again, I think pretty useful. And just one final feature of X3 SP5, which probably you have already noticed, but in case you haven't, it's one of the most highly requested things, at least from the feedback that I've seen in my 2 years at customer support, and that is basically a save setup changes prompt. So in the past, anytime you exited out of Dewesoft or maybe created a new setup file, Dewesoft never warned you that you could lose some changes. So this has all changed, and now basically whenever you could come into a situation where your changes to the setup file would be lost, Dewesoft will display a warning for you. So for example, now I have an empty setup file, I did not save it, and let's say I want to exit out of the program, I click on X. Normally Dewesoft would just shut down, but now we have a save setup prompt, and it tells me if I want to save the changes, I can say yes, save them to a file. I can say no, just exit out, or cancel and continue editing. Okay, so this basically concludes our presentation today. I hope you found out some new useful features, and now we still have a couple minutes left. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unmute everybody, and if anyone has any questions, just feel free to ask them.
Hello, Matik.
Yeah, hello.
Hi, it's Larry Limbo.
Oh, hey, Larry.
How are you?
Doing good. You?
Great, doing great. Hey, question.
Sure.
I noticed that when using the security tab, I need to lock down the setup, trying to restrict users from accessing.
Sorry, it looks like we're getting some feedback. Okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. So I'm trying to restrict some use, but I realize when I use the security tab and I do restrict some features and functions, the user still has the ability to get inside and edit the formulas on the right side.
Yeah.
So that's it's kind of that's the point of even having that security to begin with, because you can go in there and make changes.
Yeah, so the edit feature was, let's say, added only fairly recently, and yeah, that's definitely a loophole that needs to be addressed and tied to the security module as well. So yeah, for sure.
Okay, so is that on the list of things that we're going to be working on, or?
For sure, yeah.
Potentially, okay, great. Yeah, because that would help us out a lot, because we're actually in Tempe, we're doing a lot of more of the PID control, and we definitely don't want anybody in there making any adjustments.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And another question. Not sure how familiar you are with the Excel writer.
Oh, I know about it. Yeah, sure.
Okay. But I noticed that when you make a second worksheet, that it's not functioning. It works great if you have one worksheet, but if you create a second worksheet or third, for some reason I could not get that to work at all.
So this is multiple sheets within the same Excel file, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I've tested the Excel Writer plugin, let's say 3 or 4 months ago, when you've added some new stuff, and at that time I can say that it worked fairly fine.
It did on the multiple worksheets?
As far as I remember, yes.
Okay.
So did you already send this one in, or is this something new?
Excuse me?
Did you already send a report in for this, or is this something new? You did, okay.
I did. So, okay, I'll just hang tight for that. Thank you.
Okay.
Ooh, getting some feedback.
Okay.
One more question then.
Yeah, sure.
One last question. Is there a way to copy and paste user inputs?
Not at the moment, no.
Not at the moment. Okay, because I know you can copy them, but you can't copy and paste them.
Yeah. So currently we've got it's kind of separate. I think the copy and pasting, let's say for math or for the analog int app, I don't think it's really standard across all modules, but it's definitely one thing that could be improved in the future for sure.
Okay. All right. And then one last thing on the Excel writer, the header, because I know the header information, you can actually print that to the Excel spreadsheet, all of the parameter names. If you recall that, you can do that, but on the single definition part, on the right side, there's a single definition where you can have unique cells. You don't have the ability to print out or export the parameter name. Only on the other column on the left, if you recall that.
That one is a bit beyond me.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. And I also submitted that as well, so we'll see how that goes.
Okay, if you won't get if you haven't gotten a response anytime soon, then you can send me a follow-up email and I'll check on it.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Matisse. No. I think I have a feedback problem here.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I think it's fine now, so go ahead.
Okay. Going back to the mapping control, I've been playing with it quite intensively the last few days. First thing I found out, you need to have OpenGL4 or better to make it work. So anybody listening, don't waste your time trying to make it work on an old PC. It just won't. Now I've got it working, and when I'm outside everybody's firewalls, I can upload the maps. I'd like to use other people's maps.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I just want to jump in real quick before I forget.
Okay.
To everyone who will want to try out the map, please download the X3 SP5 version that was uploaded today.
Right.
Yes, we had some minor issues with the map, and we only just managed to get it up, let's say, the same hour that I started the first webinar. So if you have anything older than a day, please re-download it.
Okay. I just downloaded it onto 4 different PCs. I have to start again.
Sorry about that.
No sweat. Yeah, it'd be nice to start using other map servers if we can access them, but I don't know anything about what things I have to put into the setup to really make that work. Is there some chance you could put a guide out to what kind of information you need to put into the map server setup box?
Well, this is a bit of a, let's say, tricky situation because not a lot of the maps are free, or maybe they are free, but they're not for commercial usage.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, it might be worth my while taking out a map license.
Okay. Also, you just want to have...
So we go for a mapped, a licensed map. I really don't know what kind of things I have to put into the box to...
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you mean. So you just want a generic tutorial for...
Yeah, that'd be good if you could post something up, just a little, map tutorial and setup guide. I won't say I've wasted, but I've spent a lot of time learning over the last few days how to use this thing. And if a lot of that had been written down, the information's there for people, like the OpenGL version you need, what map tile servers are available, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Fine. I started a thread in the support forum. You'll see my conversation with your guys there. So
yeah, I'm familiar with the thread. Yeah,
you've seen it. Yeah, sure. Well, that's great. Thanks for the information.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, let's just take one final question because in 10 minutes my colleague has to start and he still has some stuff to prepare. If anyone has anything. Okay, then I think we're all good. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you learned something useful from the session. And if you have any further questions, just feel free to contact either me on my email or even better yet, support@dewesoft.com. Thank you very much and have a nice rest of the day.